And good morning. Welcome to Plugged In. Again, this week, James chapter 3, right after this. Well, we are back here at Plugged In this morning. It's Monday morning, and we hope that your Monday morning has already started out okay. We're back in James chapter 3 in just a few moments. We're not going to read the text, but I want to just kind of open it up by talking about how Jesus would teach. He had such a way about him in his teaching in which he wanted to connect the people to his lessons. Now, he would teach at times some parables. I don't know if you ever knew the definition of a parable, but I always learned it this way. It was an earthly story with a heavenly meaning. And so Jesus would speak in parables, and those parables were sometimes easy to understand, although even his disciples had some troubles with the parables, and Jesus said that he spoke in those sometimes to keep people from not fully understanding. In other words, they had to have a special insight to know what he was saying. And in fact, in Luke chapter 8, he quoted this verse by saying, "Though seeing they may not see, though hearing they may not hear." I'm still chewing on that passage because I would think that he would really always want people to grab a hold, but I think Jesus also wanted to teach in such a way that it wasn't just hand delivered to them. They had to go a little bit deeper if they really wanted to know. And so maybe that's what he's saying. But all that being said, when you read the last part of Matthew chapter 7 after the Sermon on the Mount, it says that the crowds left amazed at his teachings. And I think that's because he just spoke in such a common, everyday language that they could understand. And one of the things Jesus would do is use what we call word pictures. It's just a vivid display or expression in writing. Jesus wouldn't do it in writing, he would do it in his speaking. So for example, in the Sermon on the Mount, he used the phrase, "You are the light of the world. A city on a hill cannot be hidden, nor do people light a lamp and put it under a bowl." People probably would have laughed when he said that. They understood when you light a lamp in your house, you put it on a stand and it gives light to everyone. Jesus used that imagery, he used that word picture to illustrate to them that they are to be a light to their world, to their community, and the good deeds that they do will be seen, not for their glory, but for the glory of God. Well, I share that with you because we've been looking at this letter from James, and just a reminder, James was Jesus' half-brother. So one of the reasons I like the letter of James is there's a lot of things that James says that are similar to Jesus' teachings, especially in the Sermon on the Mount. He has just put it in written form to some Christians. And he gives some very practical insight. And in chapter 3, particularly on this subject of the tongue, James uses some word pictures. And so, again, we're not going to read the passage. If you want to take a few moments and get your Bible and chart through this, you can. If you want to reread it after we're done, that's good. It's going to be beneficial for you. But James chapter 3, 3 through 8 gives us some word pictures. And so what I want to do is point those out and then sort of how they apply to us in the use of the tongue. Here's one, for example. In verse 3, he uses the word bits. It's a small object that you would put into the mouth of a horse, making the animal to obey the rider. I'm not a horse rider. I've been on some in the past, but most of those horses knew where they were going. They were on those trails where even if they were blind, they knew where to go. I might have used the reins a little bit, but I'm always amazed to watch those who do all kinds of tricks with horses, or barrel racing, or you watch the old westerns and you see them running through the caverns and stuff, and how they had to guide those horses, these large animals, directed, guided by this small bit in comparison. So he says that the tongue is like the bits of an animal, okay? It's a small part of our body, but James would say it makes great boast. Another word picture that he gives is in verse 4. He uses the word rudder. A rudder is in reference to a small piece of wood, most generally. In comparison to the boat or the ship, it's a small piece of wood that helps to direct or steer the boat or ship, especially in high winds. Yesterday, when I was thinking about this lesson, I decided to do some research. Probably the most famous ship we know of is the Titanic. That was a massive ship. 883 feet long. It was 92 feet wide. At its highest peak, it was 175 feet tall. It weighed 52,130 long tons. Now, a long ton is equal to 2,240 pounds. So you have this massive ship. But then they had this rudder. Now, the rudder itself on the Titanic was large. It was 78 feet tall by about 15 foot wide at its widest part. But in comparison to the ship, it was not very big. In fact, with all the research that's been done in the past on the Titanic and how it hit the iceberg and what could have been prevented, experts have decided and came to an agreement that if the rudder would have been just a little bit bigger, it would have helped to move the ship away from the iceberg, and they wouldn't have had the disaster. So you have this small rudder on this huge ship. Verse 5, James uses this word picture, fire. Now, we are all familiar as to what the destruction a fire can cause. When I think of fire, sometimes it's in a good way. I live in a place where I can burn trash, so I take advantage of that. Or we might build a bonfire for warming up at a campsite, or to roast marshmallows or hot dogs, one of my favorite things to do. I like them black, okay? Then followed with some mustard. But anyway, that's a different thought. But I remember growing up that there would be television ads about the importance of not creating fires at campgrounds, the devastation that would happen in the woods. And in particular, Smokey the Bear would always end it with this: only you can prevent forest fires. And you think about that in connection to the tongue, it is only you and I that can prevent the devastation that our tongue can cause. We might put the blame on situations, we might put the blame on pressures in our world, but it is up to me on what words come out. It is up it's my responsibility to make sure that nasty words or hurtful comments do not come from the tongue. Verse 7, he uses a word imagery, a word picture about animals. Again, when I read this, I'm taken back to my days growing up in the Springfield area, where my mom every year would take myself and my sisters to the Shrine Mosque to watch the circus. The highlight of the circus was not only the popcorn or the cotton candy, or maybe a snow cone even, but there would be the flying trapeze. They would have a man shot out of a cannon. But then there were those in-between acts in which a trainer or an animal tamer would come out with whatever animal they were to do some different tricks. Sometimes those trainers were in a cage because they were there with the lions. Other times it was just an open ring, maybe it were elephants, or watching the dogs do certain tricks. Those of you who have pets know what it is to keep a pet tamed within your house. It's interesting that this is what James says, that you have all these kinds of animals. You have birds, you have reptiles, you have these creatures of the sea that are being tamed by man. And then he says this in the beginning part of verse 8, but no man can tame the tongue. It is a restless evil full of deadly poison. Poison. There's our word picture as we wind this up this morning. Poison might be connected to the venom that a snake uses to kill its prey. When I'm thinking of poison, I immediately think of something like bleach or pine sol, some cleaning solution that has a warning label that you should not consume this. You should not drink this. If we saw our children drinking from a bottle of Pine Sol, we wouldn't look at them and say, oh, well, hey, let me get you a straw for that, by the way. Why don't you wipe that off, with a napkin? We wouldn't condone that. We would be alarmed that they were doing that. I don't know why it was on Pine Sol. I just did a little research on that, and just the simple thing of that is that if you drink any sizable amount of Pine Sol, it could cause you to pass out, go into a coma, maybe even have seizures. So we put warning labels on different products so that we don't consume them because of the poisonous effects. Maybe there should be a warning label on our mouths at times. Well, next week we're going to cover some more topics on the tongue. But before I sign off this morning, I want to give you a Monday morning thought from the Proverbs. Proverbs are written, most of them in the scriptures, by Solomon, the wisest man in the world ever. And although there were some things that he did that weren't always so wise, but he gave us some catchy little phrases that are good thoughts to live by. And so here's one in connection to the tongue to start this week off. And maybe we can, I'll give you the reference, and then you can look it up, write it down, put it on your dashboard, put it on the bathroom mirror, put it on the fridge as a constant reminder. It's a wonderful proverb. I have practiced it at times in a positive way. And I'm also going to be honest with you and say there's been times that I have failed in it. And there's that conviction that knows that what I did I shouldn't have done. But here's the proverb from Proverbs chapter 10, verse 19. And such a true statement. It says this, when words are many, sin is not absent. Think about, you just get to a point where your anger spews out through the words, and things come out and you wish you could take them back and you can't. So he says this, when words are many, sin is not absent, but he who holds his tongue is wise. there's a good thought for not only today, but for this week, something to practice within the family. You know, as we're closing this out, I reminded when I was in third grade, my mom took myself and sisters to watch Bambi. I didn't publicize that to a bunch of my buddies at school, but we went to watch Bambi. And in that movie, remember there was this phrase where Thumper is told, if you can't say something nice, don't say anything at all. And that's also a good thought for today. I'm going to close with a word of prayer and then leave you to start your week off, and hopefully it's a